Hello, I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, and this is the latest episode of KRAD COVID Readings, in which I am reading works of my short fiction in order to make the pandemic palatable. Since 1963, the British science fiction show Doctor Who has been airing on and off, and has become one of the most popular phenomena on the planet. I first discovered the show when I was a kid. Channel 9 here in New York City would air episodes of Tom Baker's run on the show. For those of you who are watching this who don't know, the Doctor is capable of regenerating, which means that a different actor can play him once the current actor decides not to play the part anymore. There have been well over a dozen people playing the role at this point. The current incarnation is played by Jodie Whittaker. The first incarnation was played by William Hartnell, and arguably the most popular was played by Tom Baker throughout the late 70s, which was also the first episodes of Doctor Who that came over to this country. That was how I discovered him, with an episode called The Horror of Fang Rock, which sucked my little kid self right in, and I became hooked and became a big fan of the show. I was fortunate to be able to participate, at least to some extent, in some tie-in fiction. In 1996, I gained the utterly irrelevant distinction of being the first native-born American citizen to write linear adult Doctor Who fiction. I have to qualify it that much because John Peel is a naturalized American citizen. He was born in London, but I think in London. Born in England, anyway. But now lives in New York and is married to an American woman, so he's a naturalized American citizen. And also there was another writer from America who, prior to 1996, wrote kids' choose-your-own-adventure novels in the Doctor Who world. So they beat me to it, but if you don't count them, and I don't, I am the first American to write official Doctor Who fiction. It was in an anthology called Decalogue 3 Consequences, which was part of... this was when Virgin Publishing had the rights to do Doctor Who books. And they... sorry, my cat is doing something over there. And I wrote a story for that, which featured the Fourth Doctor in New York City, because I like to write about New York. I've worked in the world of Doctor Who a couple other times. From 2002 to 2009, Big Finish, which still does audios based on Doctor Who regularly, got the rights to do short story anthologies called Short Trips. And I actually edited one of them, which was called The Quality of Leadership, which had stories by Peter David, Una McCormick, Diane Duane, James Swallow, Steven Savile, and a bunch of others. And then I also wrote a story for Destination Prague, which was edited by Steven Savile. And these were stories featuring the Doctor in the city of Prague at various times. My story is called Life from Lifelessness, and it actually features two different incarnations of the Doctor, both the Fourth Doctor, played by Tom Baker on television, and the First Doctor, played by William Hartnell. Stephanie stepped out of the transmat capsule and looked out over the city. Turning to her companion, she said, "Am I supposed to be impressed?" Joanna sighed. "Look, I know it doesn't seem like much, but Prague suffered during the invasion. The Ronzredge did a lot of damage." They went down the walkway together. Stephanie said, "Yeah, I know, Joanna. I scanned the feeds." Stephanie and Joanna grew up together on Luna. They hadn't seen each other in weeks, and they wanted to spend some time playing tourist, so they transmatted to Earth to go somewhere new. Never having been to Prague, Joanna suggested it. "Look at this," Stephanie said, pointing at the buildings they walked past. "It's all post-invasion. I mean, come on, it was 20 years ago. Do we still have to do this form follows function nonsense with all the boxy designs and right angles and tiny windows?" Joanna sighed. "Just be patient. Okay? We're getting to the good bit." As they walked further, Stephanie noticed that the ugly modern structures were becoming less common. When they turned one corner, Stephanie gasped at the sight of the beautiful building that was in front of them. "This," Joanna said with a satisfied smile, "is what I wanted to see. The Altneuschel." Stephanie immediately called that word up on her implant and what that translated to. "The old, new synagogue?" Nodding, Joanna said, "It's a Jewish place of worship." Having been raised as a retro-pagan on Luna, Stephanie didn't know much about the monotheistic faiths of Terra, so she called up Jewish on her implant, then had cause to regret it. One of the oldest surviving religions among humans, it had far too much history for Stephanie to take in. Instead, she took in the synagogue. A dark brown slanted roof, a lighter base with orange-red angled awning-style outcroppings just above the ground floor doors and windows. The surfaces were all intricately designed in what she recognized as a Gothic style. This is gorgeous! Let's go inside. Joanna started running toward the front entrance. Can I enjoy the outside for a bit more? Stephanie asked nobody in particular. She used her implant to take a few snaps, then jogged after her best friend. Inside, there were decorated pillars throughout, as well as the filleted ceiling common to this type of structure, except something was wrong. Okay, Stephanie said while staring up at the ceiling. That doesn't make sense. A voice from deeper inside the synagogue said, That is true of many things. It is why we ask so many questions. Peering down the aisle in the center of the synagogue, Stephanie saw a short man with white hair and a thick beard. Goddess bless, that's so retro. Men hadn't worn beards like that since Stephanie was a kid. The man walked toward them. Welcome to the Altneischel. I'm Rabbi Donig. How may I help you? Why are there 5 nerviers? At the man's confused look, Stephanie pointed up at the ceiling. There are 5 nerviers branching out from each of the support points to keep the ceiling braced. Every Gothic building I've seen on the net has 4. Donig smiled, resting his hands on his rather ample belly. I suspect that most of the Gothic buildings you've seen have been Christian churches? Blinking, Stephanie said, I guess so. 4 of those nerviers would look like a cross. What difference does that make? At that, Donig laughed. Stephanie felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. What? Suffice it to say, madam, that is not an association that the people who constructed this synagogue would have wanted. You are standing right now in the section of Prague known as Josefov, but it used to be called the Jewish Ghetto. It was where Jews were all sent to live away from the Christians. It's awful. Stephanie was unable to hide the disgust from her face. I won't argue with you. Come, let me show you the rest of the synagogue. Joanna said, We don't want to impose. That's no imposition. We so rarely get visitors when it isn't the Sabbath, and it looks like you young women have many questions. Donig took Stephanie and Joanna on a tour of the entire synagogue, answering as many questions as he could. Stephanie made a note in her implant to read up further on the history of Judaism, as it looked fascinating, if a bit nasty. After Donig took them through the first floor, including Donig's own apartments, Joanna pointed at a staircase. Where's that lead? To the attic. Can we go up there? Chuckling, Donig said, There's nothing there to see, at least not anymore. What do you mean? Stephanie asked. Considering the rabbi had shown them even the non-public areas, she was surprised at his sudden reticence. Donig considered the question for a moment. Then, again resting his hands on his belly, he asked, Would you young women be interested in lunch? I was going to have some herring and vegetables, and I have more than enough for the 2 of you to share. If you do, I'll tell you a story about that staircase. Stephanie didn't know what herring was, but she was always looking for new food to try and liked the idea of a story, so she agreed. Getting stuff on the implant was good as far as it went, but it wasn't as much fun as hearing someone talk to you. Joanna went along with it too, so Rabbi Donig led them to his small kitchen, and he removed several items from the fridge. That staircase leads to the attic, as I said. The rabbi who preceded me closed it off. Her name was Noam Burstein, and she was the rabbi for this synagogue on the terrible day when we were invaded. When the Ronsdej came, the rabbi said, they landed in Central Europe and encased parts of the Czech Republic, Austria, Germany, Poland, Italy, and France in some kind of force field. Then they enslaved us and made us work while the armies of the world tried and failed to penetrate the field. Rabbi Burstein had been conscripted to work at the home of one of the Ronsdej, who had destroyed the city hall of Prague and replaced it with a spherical structure made out of what seemed to be skin. The rabbi's job was to moisturize the inner walls to keep them from becoming too dry and inflexible. Unfortunately, she was forced to work on the Sabbath and was not permitted to hold services. Figuring that the best way to impress the Ronsdej was to do her work well, she performed her duties in the hope that her diligence would be rewarded. One day, after a new person had been assigned to aid her, she tried to position the Ronzdej for permission to hold services on the Sabbath, here at the Altneuschel. She went to the Ronzdej, who owned the sphere, and hooked herself up to the translator unit that was primarily used so the Ronzdej could transmit instructions to their slaves. The Ronzdej listened attentively to the rabbi's words with all 6 of their ears. Then, while consuming a live wombat with his upper mouth, he ordered Rabbi Burstein back to work with his lower mouth, adding that she was at half rations for the next 3 days. Luckily for Rabbi Burstein, she was used to fasting, so half rations didn't concern her. She just told her growling stomach it was the high holy days. When she returned to work, her new partner said in a deep voice, "That was a waste of time." The rabbi looked at her new co-worker, a tall fellow who, despite the fact that it was summer and inside the force field it was always hot and humid, wore a thick coat and a long scarf. She looked at him and said, "What do you mean?" "The Ronzdej aren't interested in the needs of their slaves. Well, beyond making sure you don't starve to death anyhow." "You? Aren't you a slave as well, Mr. Doctor, actually? Whatever it was you asked the Ronzdej for, you weren't likely to receive it. They have no reason to care for their slaves. You won't be around long enough, and neither will they." Rabbi Burstein frowned. "I don't understand." "Nor I, to be honest. It's not as if there's a shortage of places in the galaxy for them to settle down. You see, the Ronzdej lost their homeworld half a dozen centuries ago. Since then, they go flitting about the galaxy, finding an inhabited planet to settle on for a few months, capturing a segment of the population and putting them to work, then blowing it up and moving on." That both shocked and worried the rabbi. She did not know how this fellow knew so much, but she didn't like the way his story ended. "How do you know this?" she asked, incredulous. "Oh, they've done it before. I've tried to stop them, but they're very difficult to reason with. Always constructing biomechanical spheres and eating live animals and putting sentient beings to work." Seeing that a patch of the wall was drying up, the rabbi and the doctor ran over to it. As they worked to make it soft again, the rabbi said, "Well, that would explain it then. I was hoping they would allow me to have services on the Sabbath at the synagogue." "Ah! Yes, well, the Ronzdej have no real concept of spirituality, I'm afraid. Materialists through and through. Oh, some of them have religious leanings, but they all went up with the homeworld, sadly." They finished their task and set down the equipment. The rabbi was grateful for someone to talk to. This doctor fellow was rather gregarious, and she found she had missed conversation. "They do provide downtime," the doctor said after a moment. "Perhaps you can hold a service in the cafeteria." Shaking her head, the rabbi said, "No, doctor, you misunderstand. While I would appreciate being able to hold services, it is access to the Altneuschel that I require." The doctor's eyes grew very wide when the rabbi said that, and he grabbed her arm with an iron grip. "What did you just say? The Altneuschel? Are you telling me we were in Prague?" Unable to help herself, the rabbi laughed. "Of course we're in Prague, doctor. Where else would we be?" Letting go of her arm, the doctor said, "Well, with the randomizer, we could be anywhere. I knew it was Earth, of course. Even Romano worked out that much. But I didn't realize we were in Prague. It looks so much different from the last time." "I suppose," Rabbi Burstein said grimly, "that the Ronzdej have as little use for preserving the structures of a great European city as they do spiritual needs." Plus, of course, I was lost here in the 25th century. He shook his head. "But that's neither here nor there. Rabbi, you are a rabbi, yes?" She nodded. "If you are indeed headquartered out the Altneuschel, and the structure still stands—" "It does," the rabbi said. "I was able to talk to one of my friends at the cafeteria the other day, and she said the entirety of Josefov has been left alone by the Ronzdej." "Excellent! I would say, Rabbi, that it is very important that we both go to your synagogue as soon as possible. You see, unless something has changed, there's something of grave importance in the attic of that building." The rabbi's eyes widened. "You know of the Golem?" "More than that, Rabbi. I was the one who imprisoned it in your attic." "That's ridiculous," Rabbi Burstein said. "It was the Maharal who imprisoned the Golem's remains there." "Well, he helped, certainly, and I had to convince him that it was the right thing to do." That caused the rabbi to burst out laughing. Even as she did, she noted another dry patch, and she and the doctor moved to moisturize it. "Doctor, you are obviously teasing me. The Maharal lived in the late 16th century, 550 years ago." "Oh, I admit it's been a while since I saw him last," the doctor said as he helped the rabbi moisturize the wall. "You know, he didn't like being called the Maharal. He preferred to simply be Rabbi Yehuda Levi, but the populace did rather insist on the title. I suppose after I left, he continued telling the story about the vision that led him to the creation of the Golem, and that he took 2 others to the banks of the Vlatva River and used the mud there to create the Golem. Well, perhaps it did happen that way. Hard to say, really, as I didn't show up until later." now the rabbi was starting to grow angry. Doctor, the golem is the sacred protector of the Jews, created by the Maharal, or Rabbi Levi, as you called him. Yes, it was, because that's what Rabbi Levi told it to be. You see, the doctor said, I was on a Lysiak's ship. The TARDIS had materialized aboard it while it was traveling in hyperdrive. There'd been an accident, and several large meteorites made out of their clay were tumbling through space. And, because they were in hyperdrive, those meteorites were scattered all over the galaxy. The Lysiaks have a very peculiar hyperdrive, you see, involving the folding of space around them, so they're in essence everywhere at once. That makes their accidents rather far-flung. One piece of clay inadvertently got on board the TARDIS, unbeknownst to us. And soon afterwards, having left the Lysiaks to gather their clay from across the cosmos, we arrived in orbit around the Earth. That's when Susan discovered us our piece. She panicked and thought it was dangerous, so I'm afraid to say she jettisoned it. Most of the meteorite burned up in the Earth's atmosphere, as these things will do, but a bit of the clay remained. For obvious reasons, Susan and I had to retrieve as much as possible. That clay, you see, is the basis of the Lysiaks' entire economy. It can channel mental energies. Well, some mental energies. Most species don't have the kind of psionic ability. Humans have the potential, but back in the 16th century, very few did. The Lysiaks arrived, having tracked the clay, and they persuaded us to travel down to the planet to collect it. They sent us down in one of their shuttles, but when Susan and I arrived at the Vlatva River, the clay was gone. Scans showed that the meteorite had landed there, but it was nowhere to be seen. Still, we did find the clay rather easily, as it was in the shape of a large human, wearing the clothes one would expect of a citizen of Prague at the time, and hitting someone very hard on the head. It seemed that the Lysiaks' shuttle had miscalculated, rather. It had brought us to Prague a few years late. Quickly, Susan, I told my granddaughter. We must take possession of this creature. Are you sure we can, grandfather? She asked. Oh, of course, my dear. Surely the two of us will have superior mental acuity to that of a medieval human. As a species, humans will not achieve any sort of psionic ability for several centuries, so don't you remember your lessons? Now quickly, before that poor man is hurt. We concentrated, focusing all our mental energy on the creature, but were unable to take possession of it. Still, we stopped it from hitting that man on the head. Grandfather, Susan said, do you see what's written on its forehead? I squinted at the creature. I do believe that's Hebrew. Emet, Susan said. It means truth. Grandfather, don't you see? We're in Prague in the 16th century. This must be the Golem of Prague. Susan was always a keen student of Earth history. In fact, shortly after this, I enrolled her in an Earth school. Bless my soul, I said. I do believe you're correct, Susan. The golem turned around and started walking. We followed it, naturally, and it led us to the Jewish quarter and the Alp Neuchel. Rabbi Levi was waiting for the golem. Welcome back, Yossel. Did you deliver the message to... Only then did he notice Susan and me. Who are you? I am the doctor, and you, sir, are toying with forces you scarcely understand. This creature must not be allowed to continue to exist. I am Rabbi Yehuda Levi, and I would say the same of you. Yossel here is a citizen of Prague. Balderdash, my good man, it is clay, and clay from another world, no less. You speak nonsense, doctor. To you, perhaps. But even if you believe that this clay came from a deity rather than outer space, it does not change the fact that it is volatile. What do you mean? Rabbi Levi asked. The clay responds to literal thought. Obviously, you are a particularly impressive mental specimen. Susan added a tidbit from her studies. They call you one of the finest minds in Europe. Rabbi Levi shrugged. I leave such judgments to others. I am simply a humble scholar. You sell yourself short, my good man, I said. Few humans could control the Lysiak's clay as you do, but it requires mental discipline of a type that only comes with a lifetime of study. Your lifetime has been devoted to studies of a rather different nature. Noble, for all that, but not of a type that will help you maintain strict control over your friend Yossel here. There was a bit of silence after that, as Rabbi Levi considered what I told him. Finally, he said, Yes, it is true that Yossel is made of clay, but I was told in a vision to create him, to protect our people. The Christians, it is not enough that they exile us to this ghetto, doctor, but they accuse us of killing children and using their blood to make our Passover meals. That is only the beginning of what they do to us. I listened to Rabbi Levi tell the stories of indignities the Jews had suffered in Prague, most of which I knew about in the abstract, but it was somewhat different to hear it from the horse's mouth, as it were. Still, I did promise the Lysiaks I would retrieve their clay. While most of this particular meteorite had burned up, there was still what was being used for Yosel the Mute. Rabbi Levy insisted I stay to observe, to see how much good the golem was doing his people. Sadly, that was not what I observed. Instead, I saw a mob storm the gates to the Jewish quarter. Rabbi Levy told Yosel to hold them back until the Emperor's army could quell the uprising. Instead, the golem started fighting the mob, pummeling anyone who came too close. Hundreds died at the golem's hands. His strength was such that a merest tap from his fist was enough to break a human neck. Rabbi Levy was rather surprised when he first heard the crack of bone, and horrified when he saw the corpses that were soon littered at Yosel's feet. Among us, Susan, Rabbi Levy, and I were able to make the golem cease his slaughter, but it was a near thing. We brought him back to the Altneuschel, and I turned on Rabbi Levy. Do you see what I mean? The clay is dangerous. Perhaps the clay is dangerous, Rabbi Levy said, but the golem is sacred and necessary, not just as an entity, but as a symbol. I agree that Yosel's time has ended, but that time may come back. By then, don't you think we might be able to handle him a little better? What are you suggesting, my good man? Let him stay here. I will hide him in the attic of the Altneuschel and give strict instructions that no one is to go there. Yosel will remain there until he is needed once again. Susan agreed with him. Most of the meteorite burned up, grandfather. We could just tell them that it all burned. I wasn't entirely comfortable with lying to the Lysiacs, but I also could see both Susan and the rabbi's points, so I agreed. But a strict instruction will be inadequate. I shall provide security of my own for the attic. So it's lucky that we found each other, Rabbi, the doctor said. You see, I'm the only one who can access the attic and retrieve the golem. He broke into a grin. Well, Susan could also, but she's not available. Rabbi Burstein considered the doctor's words. Mostly she considered them insane. It was simply impossible that the doctor could have been present in 16th century Prague. On the other hand, he was obviously not from Earth, a trait he shared with the Ronstedge. The doctor also knew the story of the Golem of Prague. More to the point, he knew the parts that nobody else knew. About the massacre at the gates, and the strange old man and the young woman who helped the Maharal bring the golem back here. That part of the story had been passed down by the rabbis who were assigned to the Altneuschel, and only to them. I'm only telling you now because Rabbi Burstein said the secret no longer mattered when she told me. This is all fine, Doctor, the rabbi said. But it doesn't really help us, does it? The Ronstedge won't let us go to the synagogue. Yes, well, I've never been one for rules and regulations. They're so difficult to keep track of, don't you know? As the doctor spoke, he rummaged around in the pocket of his thick coat, and then pulled out a small metal rod. Ah! Almost thought I lost this. He then put the rod between his lips and blew. Nothing happened. Then he put the rod back in his coat. The doctor said nothing else after that, and he and the rabbi continued to moisturize the structure, until they heard a high-pitched whine, followed by several screams that sounded like the Ronstedge. Come on, the doctor said, and he led the rabbi to one wall, which he gestured in front of, causing the living tissue to split apart. This was how the Ronstedge made doors. Standing outside was a dark-haired woman wearing a white dress and silver boots. The rabbi barely noticed that the woman though, as she was too busy staring at the small robot dog that was next to her. Romana, K9, glad you could make it, the doctor said. The robot dog then spoke. Thank you, master. The woman, Romana, stood with her hands on her hips, and she did not look happy. What took you so long? I did tell you I had to reconnoiter. You call letting yourself get captured by the Ronstedge a reconnoiter? No, I call it querying the locals for information a reconnoiter. Romana, this is Rabbi Noam Burstein. Rabbi, this is Romana, and that's K9. Romana ignored the rabbi. I was unable to get the TARDIS to dematerialize. The Ronstedge force field is... Yes. I'm sure that's all very interesting, Romana, but it doesn't really matter. You see, we're in Prague, and that means we have the perfect weapon to use against the Ronstedge. But, come along, the doctor said, as he moved toward Josephov. We haven't any time to waste. The Ronstedge won't be unconscious for long. 17.9 minutes, master, the robot dog said. Feeling rather overwhelmed, the rabbi followed the doctor and his friends to Josephov. Every time they encountered a Ronstedge sentry, K9 fired a laser beam from its nose to deal with it. They arrived at the synagogue. Rabbi Burstein had heard stories about the one rabbi who tried to go into the attic and came down white and shaking, and another story about a Nazi soldier who was prevented from entering the attic by unknown means. She remembered that, and also remembered what the doctor had said about a security system. Given that the man walked around with a robot dog that fired a weapon that put a Zat gun to shame, she shuddered to think about what kind of security such a man might come up with. When they arrived here, The doctor grinned. Remarkable. The place hasn't changed a bit. Then he grew serious as they entered, and looked at the rabbi, speaking in a much deeper voice. You should stay here, Rabbi. K9, you protect her. Affirmative, Master. Romana, come with me. The doctor was gone for several minutes. During the entire time, the rabbi was convinced that the Ronstedge would come and take her away. But no Ronstedge came, and even if they did, she had K9 standing by. Then she was startled by stomping sounds that grew louder in intensity, shaking the entire synagogue. She turned around to see the doctor, Romana, and the Golem of Prague. It was a little bit taller than the doctor, naked, its hairless skin a dark brown color, like clay that had been baked in a kiln. Its features looked almost unfinished somehow, but it had huge muscles, which seemed very well defined. It had circles for eyes, but no pupils or irises, and its mouth was just a slit. The golem couldn't talk in any case. As it says in the Talmud, humans cannot create life, and the golem does not have a soul. Only its tzaddik, like the Maharal, could even go so far as to create this approximation of it. Perhaps the clay was indeed from outer space, as the doctor had said, but it does not matter. Even the doctor himself said that the Maharal was special, one of the few who could manipulate the clay so well. The details may differ, but the story remains the same. And that is all that matters, no? In a tight voice, the doctor said, Romana and I are controlling the golem. What will you do with him? Now the doctor smiled. Make the Ronstedge an offer. Come on, K9. The doctor then walked through the streets of Prague. Very soon, several armed Ronstedge troops arrived. The golem immediately moved on one of the Ronstedge, who fired all their weapons. But they had no effect on the golem, who then picked up one of the Ronstedge and threw him so far he landed in the Vlatva River. This, the doctor said, is the Golem of Prague. He is the protector of the people of this planet. If you do not leave Earth in peace, the golem will destroy you all. The rabbi did not point out to the doctor that the golem was only the protector of the Jews of the city of Prague, not the whole of humanity. Besides, of what use are legends unless they can be adapted for their times? At first, the Ronstedge did not agree to these terms, and they attacked the golem in greater numbers. But it did no good, especially since K9 was also helping out. The Ronstedge were not used to resistance of this sort, and did not know what to make of the golem, who could not be harmed by their weaponry. Eventually, they gave in to the doctor's terms, lowered their force field, made their living structures shrivel into nothingness, and then departed without a word. After it was all over, Rabbi Burstein said to the doctor, Is this why the Maharal wanted you to keep the golem here? Well, perhaps not this specifically, but certainly he knew that the golem might be needed again. What happens now? Romana spoke before the doctor had a chance to. Doctor, we cannot allow the Lysiak's clay to remain here. What if the Ronstedge had discovered it before we arrived? Can you imagine the havoc they could have wreaked with it? And they're hardly the only aliens to invade this world. Imagine the Daleks, or the Rutans, or the Sontarans, or the Cybermen with control of the clay. She shuddered. Honestly, this planet is a magnet for the foulest species of the galaxy. I wonder why you think so highly of it. Oh, the place grows on you, rather, the doctor said to his companion, then turned back to the rabbi. She's right, though. I think it would be best if I finally fulfilled my promise to the Lysiaks from so long ago and returned their clay to them, don't you think? I cannot argue with you, Doctor, Rabbi Burstein said. Or, rather, I could argue with you, but I do not think I would win. Therefore, I hereby turn over the Golem of Prague to your care, and thank you for your assistance. Popping the last piece of herring into his mouth, Rabbi Donik said, And that is the story of the staircase. I can take you up there if you wish, but there's literally nothing there. You don't use it for storage? Stephanie asked. Donik shook his head. Out of respect for what the attic represents, we leave it alone. He leaned forward and smiled conspiratorially. Besides, no one is sure if the doctor's security system is still in place, and no one wishes to risk it. Joanna got up from the kitchen chair she'd been sitting in. Well, thanks, Rabbi, but we should be going. Stephanie also rose. Yes, thank you, Rabbi. We really appreciate it. It is my pleasure, Donik said as he also got to his feet. It is good to see young people who are curious about the world. There's one thing I don't get, Stephanie said. That doctor guy, what was his name? At that, Donik chuckled. Doesn't matter. The Maharal is known now as Yehuda Levi, as Judah Lowe, as many others. Perhaps the doctor has other names too. But is a name more important than his deeds? Looking at Joanna, Stephanie just rolled her eyes and said, "Thanks." As they left the Altneuschel, Stephanie muttered, "If you didn't know his name, you should have just said." Yeah. That's, it's very hard to find the Short Trips anthologies now, unfortunately. Once Big Finish lost their license in 2009, they went out of print and they were not allowed to reprint them. There were 29 of them altogether, 28 anthologies that they put together, and then a 29th, which was basically a best of, where there was one story from each of the previous 28. So if you can find it at a secondhand store, I'd recommend it. It was a fun anthology, and I really enjoyed it. Although, as I said, it's hard to find now. Thank you very much for listening. You can find me online at DeCandido.net. You can read my blog at DeCandido.wordpress.com. And you can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/KRAD. I've got a ton of new material up, a whole bunch of new TV reviews, movie reviews, and vignettes, as well as the usual cat pictures and weekly excerpts of work in progress, as well as first looks at my first drafts, depending on what level you support at. Thank you very much once again, and please stay safe.